Hello and welcome. I'm Nat.
I'm Jodie. It's so cool to have you here in this really powerful presentation being brought to us from Germany today, where Edward Graham is house sitting right now, and we've had the privilege on a couple of occasions to house sit with Edward. We know him as Eric as well, so he does have two names. And really having that first-hand experience of being in his space and watching him take on a new language, take on a brand new language and learn it in next to no time. From a house sitter's perspective, it's incredible, and that's why we wanted to share some of his knowledge and some of his tools and tips and tricks on how you can do this too, at least to get by with a conversational aspect to being in a different country with a different language, and maybe even be inspired by his take on why it's so important to do this, just even for your own growth, understanding and connection with your neighbours and your local communities. So how are you and where are you in Germany right now?
So I'm in Germany. Ich bin in Deutschland, in Köln. Es nennt sich Köln. So that's Cologne, Germany. And I've been here about probably going on a month, or between a month and about 5 weeks.
Yep.
Very cool. But I need you to actually share as well where you came from before here, because we did actually do a recording on a live webinar. Unfortunately, the audio didn't work out so great, but it was kind of cool because you actually were talking Russian to us because you were in Kiev at the time.
Yeah. See, I'd have to reach into the brain. One thing I found, I'm almost 50, and one thing I found as I've been learning these languages is that they will exit my brain.
Yeah.
Almost a week after I'm gone from the country. I cannot think of how to say even the most basic things that used to be like this. And I used to get worried about that and think, geez, did I lose it? Will I ever get it back? And I found each time I've even gone for one day back into Greece or Turkey, or been exposed even for a few hours to Russian speakers, it just comes back.
I think that's a good point, though.
That's a super cool thing.
Yeah, I think because people do worry about that. Like we've, been in Spanish-speaking countries, but we've come out of it again for quite a while now, and it's like, oh, am I ever going to remember stuff? But then when we go back in, we do remember it, and we add more words to that again, and it's like, oh, so we are building it up slowly.
I think there's a natural recall process that happens when you're surrounded again with it.
Yeah.
But I think also that there's a way to learn languages that prompts your brain even more.
Yeah.
And we can talk more in detail about that, but it's really about keeping it close to what's the most relevant thing for you to do in the language.
Yes.
And what I like as well, and you've got this fascination with how the mind triggers. Like you actually have a real deep fascination into the psychology and workings of the brain to trigger all this stuff. But you also had direct experiences. And I love the way you got the light bulb behind you. It's kind of like, this, like
ding, you could just make the little sound every time we create a light bulb. Yeah, light bulb.
But you've had these direct experiences too. And I remember you telling a story when we caught up in Greece last time, where, just that whole, I've left the country, therefore it's left my brain because I need to keep space in there for the next place I'm going to. But when you go back and do a border crossing, and in your case, a couple of times you've had a couple of little stressful situations with immigration and visas and things, and bang, suddenly it comes back and you're almost watching yourself going, who the hell is speaking that?
It does feel like a movie. But I have to say, I don't feel particularly like I've got any kind of super memory over anyone else. I forget people's names all the time. I forget basic things like phone numbers. And I have a lot of trouble learning certain words unless I make associations. That helps. So I don't think I'm more than just a normal learner. It's just that I've had enough experience that I've been able to hone in on what works and where I can get the most traction with less effort. That's really what I'm interested in, is how to economize so that my efforts really give me double or triple the result that I would normally get from just looking at a textbook.
Yeah, we're going to definitely testify that it works, because we did go to Greece together for the first time, and you hadn't been to Greece before or spoke Greek. And seriously, within weeks, you were quite what seemed like quite fluent. I don't know what you were saying, but it seemed pretty good. But yeah, you became pretty much our interpreter when we went shopping and doing different things, because the place that we were, as you know, was very remote, and it really was only native Greek speaking. So it was really difficult. We struggled big time with it, but we were just being able to observe how you were doing it was just so, I don't know, it was so interesting and so different to other ways of learning languages.
And I guess that's where, like, today, what we wanted to do is get you to give us some of those things that you do.
Give us the juice.
Not only, like, we've had a direct experience of you giving us some coaching when we were in Italy just to get by with some Italian/Sicilian, because I know there's a little bit of difference there. But, yeah, we really wanted you to sort of be able to say, okay, how is it, or what is your process that you do? Can you share that process with other people? And that's what you've been working on, and that's awesome. So, yeah, maybe we can get into that.
You can just jump into it if you want.
Yeah, cool.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Awesome.
Do you see that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So just a quick brief introduction, because I know this is for a house sitting platform. So not all house sitters are language enthusiasts, but all house sitters can benefit from being a little more versed in the local languages where they live, especially if the house sit lasts long term. It becomes more and more relevant, I think, as the weeks go by. We just realize that there's so many more things that we need to do than we initially encountered. And it's good to be prepared for the eventual, you have to call the vet, or you have to call the plumber, or, and these things have happened to me in different house sits where there has been nobody to interpret for me, and I had to figure out how to communicate what needed to be done. And knock on wood, it happened, and it wasn't just by the skin of my teeth. It was by a little bit of combining it with a little bit of know-how and experience. So I'm happy to share that. Brompton house sitter. So basically I travel around the world, and with my bicycle, it's a special little bike that was originally made for yachts, I think, many years ago. And it's just become this wonderful, this kind of travel bicycle that for me is made my travels more fun through South America, the Middle East, North Africa, Europe. It's
amazing to think that this little fold-up bike that's called a Brompton actually went on the Camino de Santiago with you.
Yeah, I took it for 2 weeks. I was on this bike for about 7 hours a day, some days. And just zooming by the walkers, and yeah, it was an amazing experience. That's a whole other thing. All right. So the first thing when I talk about, when I teach languages to people is I don't teach the actual language at all at first. I really like to talk about the psychology of what you're doing as a communicator. Because the idea is to graft the language learning effort onto what mostly you are already doing and what your needs are. And this helps you to anchor your efforts and to see results faster. So the very first thing I talk about is that we're all actors when we communicate, and we all have roles that we're switching in and out of unconsciously all day long. So you're together right now, you wake up together, you're in your partnership role. You may switch into now interviewing me together, you're in your co-business working role or your interviewer role. I'm in the interviewee role. But more simply, when we interact with people on day-to-day basis, we're in the client role often. Sometimes we're in the citizen on the street, giving directions role, and other roles like that we're switching in and out of. And each one of these roles have a kind of script that goes along with it.
Yep.
So you're kind of expected to say certain things or ask certain things when you're in that role. Does that make sense?
Yes, the best example is probably the one that's coming to mind is definitely that customer in a shop. Like, we're talking about with, okay, I'm in this role in Italy or Greece or Turkey or Russia, and I need to ask for what I'm wanting in the shop. So my role as a customer, I can preempt that.
Right, you can predict. This is the work this is how it translates into the language learning. You can predict what you're going to need to say, and you can predict pretty much what they're going to ask you or what they're going to say to you in their role.
Yeah.
Because wherever you travel, unfortunately, because of globalization, wherever you travel these days, systems are pretty much the same everywhere. And people are saying the same kind of things in different languages. So one of the first things I do is I list my top roles where I'm living and anticipate what the scripts of those are going to be. And so I brainstorm that first in English, translate it into the local language in the most simple ways. And then I begin studying my scripts. I begin working those scripts on a pronunciation angle, on a sentence structure angle, so that I'm learning the grammar, I'm learning how the phrases go, and the vocabulary. It's all like part of an organic, natural way of learning that kids learn, actually. But I, as an adult, need to think through a little bit how to prioritize what I'm learning. Because maybe I'm only there for 3 months, and I only want to spend 10 hours studying this language, tops. So I economize my time by thinking about my top roles, what the scripts are, and then working with either a language teacher or a language coach or a language partner, which you can find in any of these countries that we've traveled through, to help me learn my role and to give me feedback if I said it like more or less in an understandable way.
That's awesome. And you've done that quite a number of times. We know, like in Greece, you had language partners and stuff wherever we went. You would pick up a lot.
I maxed out in Germany. I maxed out more than anywhere in Germany. I have pretty much at least one time a day. They call it here tandem partner. Yeah. Language exchange partner. Yeah. But yeah.
Fluent in German, quick as possible, perhaps then.
It's amazing. But you have to train. What I found is I have to train my partners as well to teach me in a way that I'm going to remember the simple things and to help me extract the structures, right? So if I know a structure, like, just to say a structure, okay, like Mary goes home at 8 o'clock. That, for me, that's a structure. Yep. Why? It's super valuable because I know the order of the words and now I can start switching them out, right? So it's not Mary, it's Jenny. And she's not going home, she's going to the bar. And it's not at 8 o'clock, it's maybe 6 o'clock or tomorrow or yesterday. And this is where I start to own a structure enough that I can substitute the vocabulary. I get so much out of those. I call them mother phrases. Those are like sentences that I learn first, if I can, before the list of vocabulary. Because when people learn lists of vocabulary, they just know the word, but they don't know how to put the word in a sentence. Like,
that's so true.
Peanut butter, you know, but you have to know how to request the peanut butter.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, instead of demanding things like we've done before. Ham. Pineapple.
But you can't point. So the first words that I learn in a language usually are, I point and I say that, this, here, there, can I, may I, to, you know, just what I need. I don't learn to count to 100. I learn how to count to whatever the number of items I normally buy is. Later on, I save that for later if I'm curious. Once I have a foothold, if I'm curious, then I learn how to count to 100. Okay, fine. So it's need to know basis is basically the bottom line lesson here. Okay. Know your roles and need to know.
I like that.
I really like this this slide, and you know, without it, we're willing to be silly is so very cool. But before you get into what you want to talk about here, I've got two things that are coming up out of that finding a language partner. Even if you don't formally go and find somebody to, teach you or whatever, it is actually taking on a bit of this concept and practicing it on a daily basis. For some reason, I had Eat, Pray, Love in my mind where, Elizabeth Gilbert, when she was in Italy, she had her language teacher, but they would go out to cafes and restaurants so that they could, practice the ordering and speaking and, backwards and forwards conversations. But that can actually be done when it's just you with the waiter. And we've seen you do this with the waitress, which is just, it's so cool. I mean, she was so open to helping you kind of say the right things and or learn other things, because ultimately you were flirting with us. So but it was kind of cute, but...
it was an innocent flirting.
It was innocent flirting,
Yeah.
but she was so receptive to going, oh, this is so cool that you're trying to learn my language. Like, why would you do that? But yeah, like having this conversation with you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into this, because it's not only about willing to be silly for its own sake. It's really being in that open space where there's a chance that the person in front of you, who before you were in contact, they can't read your mind. They take you at face value. You walk into their restaurant and they see how you're dressed and they hear the language you're talking with your friends, and then they make their snap judgment, right? And in our case, we look like tourists in Greece. We're speaking English. The obvious thing is going to come over and speak English to us. That's the obvious thing, right?
Yep.
And so how do you break up that, interrupt that thought process just enough to possibly turn that person into what I call a language ally? That's a native speaker who's willing to suspend that judgment of, this is a tourist, I'm going to speak English. Suspend it enough that they're interacting with you, and then you have a chance to grow in that language. And I put a lot of thought into this. I mean, I've learned 9 languages in immersion. I wouldn't say I'm totally fluent, but I'm damn good for the amount of time that I've spent there.
Yes.
And one of the key things to do is to know how to turn more and more people into your allies, so that you don't experience that frustration of walking in, saying something really kind of, and then them switching to English, and then it was like, oh, shame. You know, I'm an idiot. I'll never go back in there again. Yeah, I've had those moments too. And I think it's because of that experience that I realized the importance of adopting a certain attitude and knowing why you're doing it. It's not just to do it. It's because it's the most valuable way to learn a language. You're with them in their home turf. They're just doing their lives, and you're walking in there. And that's the ultimate test. That's more than an ABC level in the European language, you know, the grade system they give you. It's more than an A on a test in Spanish at university. It's the ultimate test, is that you've got these people who are, otherwise, if you weren't there, they're talking with each other in this language, and they include you. They accept you to the point where they're answering your questions in the language, and they ask you maybe a curious question like where you're from or something.
Yeah.
And you're prepared. You're prepared enough, or if you're not, there are tricks for how you can capture those moments so that next time you have a similar situation, you're more prepared.
And I think it's also really rewarding. I mean, you can almost put after that, willing to be silly / cheeky / you know, whatever you want to say. But
like everybody has their style. But.
Yeah, but even from the cheekiness side of things, when I witnessed this with you, the fishmonger, he could have easily, as you say, put the judgment, okay, here's this, you know, white, fair-skinned, mustn't be from Greece person. I'm just going to speak English, you know, or assume that he's German or whatever it may be. But you spoke to him in Greek to start with, and you were probably a little bit cheeky and maybe asking him for a bit more fish than what he was willing to give. But as the conversation went on, he ended up really laughing with you and enjoying the whole interaction, so that as you walked away with your parcel of fish, he called you back and gave you an extra. Like, here's the reward. It was almost like he was tipping you to say thank you for
having a
the
go.
effort. And yeah, it was awesome.
That can happen. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Just about anything can happen because people are people and they react in different ways. But what I found works is be yourself, be transparent. Don't try and hide the fact that you're learning the language. Be open about it. And even ask them, how would you say such and such? Yeah. In other cases here in Germany, I've gone my first week in German. One thing I have as a rule, I just don't go around speaking English. That's probably the best way to really learn the local language, because if I'm not going to speak English to the person, well, what am I going to do? You know? And how am I going to get them to stay in the language with me? And what I'm going for is treat me like a moron in your language. Like if I'm a bit slow in the head, like talk to me like I'm a 2-year-old. That's what I'm trying to get them to do, because that's the level I can understand at this moment.
Yeah. Maybe choose child over moron. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, now
Treat me like a child, not a mom.
something nice. But really, I mean, the idea is I'm a mentally disabled, not, how do we say this in a PT and good-natured way, but I'm like slower than the normal.
Yes, yeah. You need them to speak slower.
They need to accept that, right? So the first week in Germany, I would go up to the counter of the train station, ready to buy my weekly ticket. I'd have my script of how to say it in German. Like for real life, you know, like question 1, question 2, question 3, what I need to ask, anticipated it out. But I'd go up to them because Germans are famous for all knowing really good English. And I'd go up to them and I'd say in English, all right, I'm going to try this in German first, okay? So I'd say that in English and then I'd switch to German, and 9.9 out of 10 times they stayed in German with a big smile.
Very cool.
They were with me. They were my allies.
That's cool.
I think people love that. You know, I know when people have come up to me in, say, Australia or something, and they don't speak the language very well, like there's such a compassion and reaching out for them. Like there's that connection point between us that it's like, wow, like you're having a go. That's really cool. And that's certainly been our experience when we have had a go at different words and stuff like that. People just love it that that you're having a go.
They do, and it turns a normal shopping experience, which could be terrifying or alienating, it turns it into like a game or something fun. And when it works and you just did your thing in Italian, you feel really good. There's a high
Yeah, there is.
being able to.
Yeah, that's very true. That's cool.
Yeah. So I like it because it makes me feel like I'm really traveling. I'm really doing more than just showing up, spending money, whatever, being a tourist. I feel like I'm connecting. I'm doing something different.
Well, that's probably why it is so important as a house sitter, because that's one of the, I think, points or features that we really enjoy as house sitters is that we're often off the beaten track. We're not in big cities and tourist areas and things like that. That's one of the joys of it. So oftentimes you only have native speakers in some of these places, these smaller villages or country areas and stuff. So to actually have that local experience, which is why a lot of us go house sitting in the first place, to get off the beaten track of the tourist trail, and that being able to have that communication with someone and have that true local experience really enhances our whole house sitting experience in general.
And it builds, and two things, it makes you more useful to the house owner because they can rely on you more to get things done for them, which require communication. And you can deal with emergencies better if they come up. And then the other thing is it lays the groundwork, I think, for a long-term relationship that you might have where you go back the next year or something like that. And you build a relationship not only to the house owner, but more to the place as well.
Yeah. And a lot of homeowners do worry if you don't speak the language of how you are going to cope. Are you going to be okay with that? Because homeowners do worry about their house sitters and that they're not going to panic and freak out and leave type thing. So,
and I know you've got some stories to share around particular incidences where you've been house sitting and needing the languages. So do you want to continue on with your slides, or is there any other?
Sure. I'll just do two really short snips of stories. Needing a plumber in Greece and not knowing even the word for plumber and having to get on the phone and call an 80-year-old man on a Sunday at 8 a.m. to come immediately to the house because there was water flying out of a pipe, and having to look, and this kind of ties into the slide, having to look on Google Translate and then double check the Google Translate, because Google Translate it's great, but it's not 100% reliable. So there are tricks to actually check Google Translate.
Yep.
So having to do that and get on the phone and ask for that, and it happened. You know, the owners weren't available. They were in France. And I took care of it. And that man came over and he did the whole thing, and the whole thing happened in Greek. And that was even me driving down to the corner telling him which market I was going to meet him in front of at what time. I mean, all of that. And it was literally like the first week back in Greece, I was still, the bolts were still turning, but it worked because I had done that previous experience where I kind of built up a certain level of being able to make requests, ask for things, etc. in Greece. So I came back. Another one was just being dropped out of the blue sky into a village in Ukraine. Not one English speaker in a village of 3,000, a remote village about 90 minutes away from the capital. Kyiv, and just having to take care of my own needs. Because the homeowner met me, we overlapped one evening, she was gone the next day, and that was it.
Wow.
I was expected to deal with everything. When the internet failed, when I needed to ask the neighbors for anything, when I needed to shop and ask for things because everything's behind the counter and there are little markets there and they count with abacusses instead of calculators, everything was in Russian.
Wow.
And so that was like major, major, major. And I have videos of, I don't have them now, but I had these spy glasses that I would take with me. And I would actually tape myself interacting. And I found within the first couple of weeks, I found a Russian teacher. Luckily, who was bilingual in English, who I could just say, how do you say this? How do you say that? And show her my tapes and say, what did they say here? What did they say here? And so it is kind of like learning your role and scripts and stuff like a movie, because you're watching the movie happening and then you're deconstructing what happened. And because people so naturally repeat themselves most of the time, once you do one of those, it has a lot of carryover utility for future situations.
You know, the most highlighting thing about when you did first tell us the story about being in Ukraine was the fact that you met and hung out and spoke with the kids in the community that had, and even some of the adults had never actually met a foreign-speaking person. Like, you were the very first I don't come from here speaking Russian person that they'd ever come across.
Ukrainian. They had never met a person who could not speak Ukrainian before.
Wow.
You would have been like
That's
an
amazing.
alien.
I was like the man from the moon for them.
What an experience, though. Like, if you were so terrified of not being able to speak the language, you wouldn't put yourself in that situation in the first place. And what an experience you would have missed out on. To be able to, and for them as well, to actually expand their world. It's just amazing, like, when you really sort of dive into it a little bit more of what it can do for people.
You need to definitely share that photo that you put on Facebook where you got all the kids sitting around you and you're there, because it was just like...
That's so
cool. They were very proud, and they were elbowing with each other and figuring out how they wanted to make their photo. It was a very beautiful moment. I was helping... that was my Russian teacher, is the English teacher of the town, and she teaches all these kids English, and so we were doing games with them. And then I ran a kind of a little bit of a speaking theater kind of thing where they did role plays, and this was just their first exposure to a foreign person who was
It's very cool. And I know that that's sort of a flip side where it's like they really want to learn English, but you're there really wanting to learn, you know, to communicate and have a better experience in speaking Russian in Ukraine. And we had a very similar type of thing in, like, high in the Andes of Peru, you know, the really, really top of the Andes. And we walked into this little tiny community class, and we should have learned better, but we were introduced as having come from Australia. So, of course, all the kids, having learnt a bit about Australia, were sort of like, you know, kangaroo, and, you know, and it's like those experiences are just golden. And then to be able to, you know, it's like asking them in English, but then if they could answer us in Spanish, we could have that kind of dual learning experience.
Yeah, you have to negotiate these things sometimes. And, I find that. I definitely find that. That people operate out of self-interest. And so if they see that you're struggling to learn their language, but they can speak yours or they want to practice yours, that might be the natural inclination, you know. And that's not a bad thing, but it's great to be able to to address it and say what you want up front and not feel like you can't say it. So I tell people, I said, you know, you've learned my language already really beautifully. You already know my language. Can I learn yours now? Can you help me learn yours? You know, just simple things like that to switch their mindset so that they don't automatically expect that, oh yeah, you're that foreigner from the US who, you know, US people don't speak other languages, or Australians don't speak other languages, or English people don't speak other languages. There's a stereotype out there. This was really quickly just about that there's a myriad of tools and tricks that you can learn for free online. I've tried so many of them. the list is too big for something like this, but basically I would divide them into tools to help you to get clear and prioritize what are your scripts going to be. So this is just like list making tools, mind mapping tools. And then there are tools for translation. And then to double check, as I said, Google. Then there are other tools for pronunciation. And I found, for example, one app, which I can't remember the name of, but I can include somewhere in this presentation. There's an app that will read it aloud with a native speaker's voice. So if, for example, I'm learning Spanish and I'm really basic and I write something down like, quiero comprar un tamal, por favor, you know, I want to buy a tamale. It's a food. It will, if it sees it written, it will read it aloud. And then you can start to hear how to actually say it, because pronunciation is a tricky thing. But what I found as a common denominator, there's a problem with reading. I call it the reading error. For example, this slide, if I'm French, I might read this slide like this. L'impulse and interaction driven, you know? Or if I were Spanish, I would say, on ligne tools and interaction driven. So they're reading in their language English, and we do the same thing. We're reading Spanish, we're reading French, we're reading Italian as if it were English, and that's exactly why un gringo habla español así, because we're pronouncing it as if it's English.
Yes, yeah.
We're not learning how to say it before we learn how to read it. And if we get that wrong, if we get that order wrong, unfortunately, that's most traditional classrooms teach you how to read before you speak. Then you're learning how to say it as if you would read it in English.
Yeah.
You know what? The one tool that surprised me that is so obvious, and yet we hadn't thought about it, because quite often, I guess, based on the fact that my 6 months of learning French and 6 months of learning German when I was, 14 years old in high school, I remember the things of counting 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. So that sort of is that basic thing sometimes. And like you were saying, if I need to go into a shop to order, 2 tamales or 4 whatever, then knowing those numbers is good. But that tool is so easy because it's YouTube. You can go to YouTube and count 1 to 10, like listen to the languages. And when you first said that to us, we're like,
amazing.
Oh, sure.
It's true. YouTube has so many starter videos.
Yeah.
And more than starter videos. Right now, I'm totally into this. I may, at the end of this time, I may actually do something strange that I was not going to do, but I may actually sing to you in German. This is one of the ways that I'm learning. It's one of the ways I'm learning how to speak German and pronounce it is by singing it.
Yeah.
And there's this site online, fabulous site, which has all the words at the bottom, like karaoke, and it has the English translation. And if you pick on a word in German, it will define it with a dictionary. And you have like a way to rewind, loop, go slower. Oh, it's amazing.
Wow.
That's a really cool way of doing it.
Because when it comes to memory, isn't it amazing that you may not have heard a song for 20 years, but you will still remember the words?
All the words.
Yeah, it's a good site. It's called 𝗣𝗲𝗿𝗀.com, and they have it for many of the main languages.
Right.
And they have everything at different levels. So people speaking and conjugating verbs for you in a fun way, or news kind of programming in 5-minute snippets. I mean, it's just the bite-size amount for you to hear the language live and get exposure and songs. Yeah. So a lot of tools. There's just a lot of tools. And that's a blessing and a not blessing at the same time, because then it's easy to feel the overwhelm of, my God, what do I do? Everybody's reaching out from the internet and grabbing on and saying, give me your email list, give me your email. I'll send you updates every day. And I've got the best solution. No, I have it. It's the typical thing, right?
Yeah.
And so what I found that keeps me centered and calm and knowing how to prioritize is by always coming back to what do I need in my life?
Yes.
Who am I speaking with on a regular basis? How do I categorize those conversations? So one could be called the shop transaction. One could be called the special purchase at the nursery transaction that I have to do every now and again. One could be called the conversation with the cleaning person.
Yep.
And like this, if I just know, if I'm observant enough to say, this is what's going on in my life, then I look for the tools to help me.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Back to this. So this is just more detail about the kinds of tools that are out there. Yeah.
Yep.
And these are all parts of learning a language. It's like learning to ride a bike or drive a car. There's various things that you're doing at once, right? So you're learning how to pronounce, you're remembering words, you're translating from English because we think in English, right? Yep. And then you're taking those interactions and finding a way to capture those so you can study some of them later.
I don't know, we just have to go back because there's going to be people looking at this slide who are going to say, spyglasses? Really? Spyglasses. Yeah. What are you talking about there?
I'm talking about a pair of glasses that look super cool. They're actually really cool, and I wear them even when I'm not using them, quote unquote, because they look cool. And they have a video recorder, and I can record audio and video of who I'm speaking with, and it's from a point of view. Yeah. So it's whatever my eyes are seeing and whatever my ears are hearing.
Yeah.
And I've been ethical with them. I mean, you can be quite unethical and spy on people, etc. That's why they're called spyglasses. But you go in public, you pretty much can tape. People are always taping with their phones. Yeah. You use your phones as well, and people never think twice. They don't know if I'm recording or if I'm just texting somebody. They have no idea when people are fiddling with their phones what they're actually doing. So you can just take a level of anxiety off of it completely and just say, if I'm going to tape, for example, I'm going for a kind of conversation, right? I meet this person every Monday. We always talk about the same thing. We've been doing it in English now for a couple of weeks, and I want to start to like make inroads in the local language. So tape it, and then go over those 5 minutes, 10 minutes with somebody. Try not to make it too long because it gets too big.
Yeah, too big a file, yeah.
And go into that detail of what is the sentence that they said? How did they construct the sentence? Be curious. What are those vocabulary words? And you get curious about that, and then you repeat it. And you can even put it into your own headphone. And so you're on the bus, you're in the car, you're jogging, you're walking, you're listening. And this is what I'm doing with German. I say it in English, and then I say it in German after a pause of a few seconds. I'm on the train, I hear it in English, I recall it in German, and then it'll come on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So with what you've got here in these tools, do you have more slides going into each one, or could we just sort of have a really quick run through of kind of, not so much what the tool is, but more maybe the overview of what the tool is doing
or how to use it? Yeah.
No problem. So which one would you like to start with?
Well, I mean, we've just looked at we've definitely done the capture tools, and you've explained what that's about. But the one that's standing out to me at the moment is definitely the pronunciation tools with Natural Reader and Phonetics Chart. Okay,
so Natural Reader is the app I mentioned before, which will read it aloud to you in a computer native speaking voice. You can also just use Google Translate, and when it translates for you in the box, there's actually a sound button, and it will say it out loud.
Yeah.
The third thing is, and the best thing that's not, it's going to be fail-safe, is if you have a partner and you come to them, a language learning partner, on internet or in person, you come to them with your list that you've written in English or you've already translated, and then you say, how do you say this? And this is where, on paper, you can write it out in a phonetical way for yourself, which will train your brain to pronounce it differently. My brain automatically looks at pronunciation. That's how I would say that word, right? Well, another native speaker of another language is not going to say it that way because their brain has been trained to make sounds different with the same letters. I've got to break the habit of my brain to only give each letter one sound. I've got to allow it to know that it can have another option or even more options than two. Yeah, it's a process. And so what it takes is writing it in a phonetical way that I understand. So I might say pra, P-R-A, noun, N-O-U-N, C-S-E-E, A-A-Y, shen, S-H-E-N.
The biggest one that comes up for me, just because we're heading into Spanish-speaking language countries again next, is the double L in Spanish. It's a Y. It's never paella. It's it's paella.
That's right.
It's having the Y. So the phonetics chart for that, I guess it's
a Y. You put the word the way it's spelled, so your brain says, okay, I recognize that word the way it's spelled.
Yeah.
And then in parentheses underneath, you put it as pa. And a couple things you can do with a phonetics chart. One, you can substitute the letters for ones that are going to make you pronounce it the right way. So that's number one. Two, you can capitalize the syllable that gets stressed in the word, because our natural stress places in English are different from other languages. So if I say paella, which is the way it's said, then I would have that A in capital E-Y, for example.
Okay. Yes.
Y-A.
Yeah.
And I separate those syllables, and that's the way I can look at it quickly, so that if I have a cheat sheet with me, say like I go into that market, which I do this. I go into that market in the first week in that country, and I go in with my cheat sheet, and it's written in phonetic script with my English, so I know I can quickly see what it is I'm saying. And then sometimes I'll put it, if I'm learning how to write in that language, I'll put it in that script so that I'm beginning to get familiar. But my most important two pieces are the English, so I know what it is, and then the phonetics, so that I just say it. Like an actor would just do a cold reading without the feeling, but they're saying the right words.
Yeah, it definitely works. I mean, we did it because you were teaching us Italian, as we mentioned, and we would go into pharmacies or grocery stores or whatever. But it was interesting because there was 4 of us learning that language, and we would all write our phonetics quite differently, according to what we would hear. So it is really interesting to put it in what you feel you hear out of each word, sort of thing.
Well,
some of you had really good pronunciation. I remember that. I think Jody, you were the most natural.
Yeah, but I think that's a way of learning, though. Like, I am more auditory.
She's very auditory.
That's more visual. So she actually needs the phonetics chart to read it, whereas I like the phonetics chart to read, but I need you to speak it to me so I can hear it. But that also brings up the question, and I know that there's people probably thinking this right now. What do you do when you have languages that aren't written in the alphabet that we know? So you've got your Greek, your Russian, your Arabic. That's a whole other
I have those. I've done all those.
Yeah.
I spend time learning the writing, but it's not before I learn how to pronounce it, right?
Yeah,
so I'm learning how to say the words and spelling them out in my own way. And, of course, there's debate. There's a 60-year language, maybe 80-year modern language learning theory history. And so, for example, when they taught Chinese 80 years ago, they used the pinyin system. So you didn't even learn the characters. You learned these other symbols that are telling you where to put the tones and so forth, and how to say the vowels. It's usually either the vowels or it's the consonant clusters, like I found in Russian and Polish and Slavic languages. That's tough because you've got a bunch of, and in Arabic too, you've got a bunch of like cluster F consonants, where it's just like, and you look at it as it's written in Polish, and that's written with Latin letters, and it's like G-R-Z-W.
Where's the vowel?
Where's the vowel?
Isn't every word supposed to have a vowel?
I've had a panic attack once or twice because I'm like, where's the vowel? How do I say mushroom soup, for God's sake? But when you do it with your phonetics, you ask the native, or you ask Google, so to speak, and it says it for you. and then you write it the way that sounded to you.
That's good.
And make sure you write it not so sloppy so that you can actually read it again, because I've done that. I've jotted it down, and then I couldn't read my own writing. I'm like, what the hell was that? What did I say?
Regards to maybe say something that you can't read. So I feel that the process would be, I'll use the example of Arabic because I'm sure you'll appreciate this one. The way that we learn is obviously very different. So for me, I'm more auditory. For Nat, she's more visual. But of course, without going and learning how to write Arabic, which is just a bunch of squiggles left-handed to me, it's
from left to right,
yeah, from left to right. It's kind of all right. What do we need to do? So we do actually have a story with the difference between auditory and visual. Is for ages, Nat was doing these meetings, going and meeting all these police people and all these sort of professionals when we were living in Dubai. And she's there with the other guys, and one of them was a translator in that. And she says one day after about the 4th meeting, she's like, "Why does everybody think I'm American?" And they're like, "Why do you say that?"
Because isn't it like Salam American?
Why are they all saying to me, "Salam American"? And they're like, they're not saying that. They're actually.
I think that's a really good point, though. That's a funny story that leads to a good point, because what happens when we're learning from native speakers, it sounds, and to a non-native English speaker who's listening to this right now, all of our words can sound like this like one long word. And one of the crucial things to begin to understand native speakers is to know where the words separate.
Yeah, what words are what. Yeah.
What words are what when they're speaking. And the best way to do this, obviously, is through figuring out what it looks like written once you hear it, so you're able to compare the two.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what the process was, because then it was like, okay, she's not hearing, all she's hearing is...
Because it was all running into each other, so it sounded like that.
Why are they pretty much saying, like in the English translation, she was going, why are they saying, "Hello, peace be with you, American"? It's like, you American. It's like, no, I'm not American, I'm Australian. But then when she saw it written, it was like, Assalamu alaikum.
Oh, it's nothing like that.
Okay. And actually, this is a really beautiful greeting, and it's a big greeting.
Peace on you. It's actually on you.
Peace on you, yeah.
Peace on you.
It's kind of like, well, that totally changed the whole
conversation.
That's right. Instead of this food, like a face like this, you actually take the greeting in, yeah.
They're probably thinking, well, I should take that well.
I had a lot of trouble with Arabic. I spent time there as an activist in Palestine, and I went there with zero Arabic. And I was stationed with a family that was, they were rebuilding their home. We were living in a Red Cross tent. And I was with them day and night in case the Israeli army would show up with bulldozers to knock down the rebuild process. And I had to figure out, it's like I didn't know enough Arabic to even have a most simple conversation. So I had to learn the hard way that way. And one of the things I did was to make sure and start separating the words, because it all ran together for me.
Yeah.
And it was totally unintelligible. Oh my God, what a hard language that is.
Maybe now that you're onto this singing thing, because some of the Arabic songs can be quite beautiful, so maybe that's a way to learn Arabic in future, is to the singing.
I can remember one song from 𝗲𝗲𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗏, who's he's kind of a famous, he's not a millennial, he's older, I guess, but he's an Egyptian singer. And so I don't even know the meaning of the words anymore, but there's this beautiful song called 𝗲𝗲𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗏, and you can look it up on YouTube. And I just remember singing it all the time when I was there. 𝗲𝗲𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗏, أنيك أحبك 𝗲𝗲𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗏.
All right, I don't know what happened there, but we just had a little glitch in the system while Eric was singing, and it's not because you're...
That's why it happened.
Maybe that was why. We shut it down. The internet shut down.
And this is not to say that we're still going to go and hear the latest German song.
German version.
Very soon, but I don't know. Can we go? Anything else sticking out on here on the tools page that specifically is working?
Memory. I think memory is good because I can't remember words when I first hear them. I had a terrible time with Russian is actually the only language that I've actually been brought to my knees. I have cried. I have wept because of some of these words that are so damn impossible to say. And how difficult it is just to ask for a glass of wine.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to get depressed if you can't ask for it.
That's enough to get depressed over.
Why is this so hard? So memory tools are good, and there's online flashcards that you can make yourself or download that other people have done the work for you.
Yep.
So that's good. And they have this thing called spaced repetition. So they have an automatic timer that you know, depending on how many right answers you give to the thing, it'll loop back around. And so, because the theory is that we remember it really well right after we're exposed to it, but an hour or a day later we'll forget it, right? So it goes right back at those low ebbs of when studies show your memory went off. It'll prompt it again at that point so that you can remember it over a more long term.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yep. And Evernote is a good one too, because it's sort of across anything. But I just want to point out one of the apps that I guess a lot of people are aware of is in the language apps, like say Duolingo, etc. I remember having a conversation with you about that, because while it's good to sort of go through their different memory triggers that they use, so they'll use things like the audio, they'll use things like, multiple choice, pictures, all the different elements to remember, say, how to say, apple in Italian.
Yeah. The idea there is, look, there's no right amount of words, but we speak in sentences, right? All of us do.
Yep.
That doesn't change for another language. We speak in complete sentences. We have a complete thought when we make a sentence. That's how we express ourselves. So learning a language, it's important to learn in sentences. And the sentences can be one word long, or they could be a bunch of words. And it's better to make it, we all know people who are kind of, what's the word in English? Who are sort of terse, you know that word? Yeah. They say things in very small.
It's almost demanding things, and
it can be taken.
No, it's not even rude. It's just short. They're very short.
Direct,
yeah.
Yeah, they're direct and they're short, and they say what takes another person 20 words, they may say it in 4.
Yeah. And
so, but it's a complete sentence. It's not dangling with a kind of a if clause dangling there. Well, then what? It's like it's a complete thought. So that's how we learn languages best is in a complete thought, even if it's simple, even if it's 1 or 2 words.
Yeah, if it's like, may I have 4 apples?
Yeah,
it can be as simple as that.
4 please. That's a complete sentence.
4 please. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it doesn't need to be complicated, I guess is what you're saying. It can be, just having really short phrases and learning those as much as you're learning the grocery items. Learn the little short phrases to go with it.
And I guess that's where something like the mind mapping comes out, is almost even thinking about how can I say this instead of just being, say, the polite person going, may I have 4 apples? It is going to something as simple as saying, yes, 4 apples, please. It's still polite, but it's reducing the amount of words. So mind mapping could actually be part of that whole kind of preempting your script and your conversation.
Yeah, I hope that's clear for people listening that, it doesn't take a long time. It takes a half an hour to script out a conversation and maybe another hour to learn it and practice it. So that's 90 minutes that you spent on a situation. But if you live there for 5 months, you're going to have that situation every week.
Yeah.
You've invested 90 minutes in having this really cool experience every single week until you leave. And it extends limitless into the future, and it only grows. Because once you're able to do this much and you feel that like excitement about it, then it's pretty easy to just grow it. And then you add another thing, and then you try something else, and then you ask for different things. And you know how people are at restaurants. Yeah. I don't know. You've been with people who have to ask about every ingredient in the dish.
Yep.
No, some people do for health.
Does it have this? Does it have like that?
Actually, speaking of the restaurant, if you go on to your next slide, I did just want to probably like kind of review a little bit, which is really what this is ultimately about. This is like the whole process nutted out, and I like the way you've done it in a table setting form of order of how we
table.
Yeah,
That's very cool.
So particularly like early in the piece of like learning something, the process of what you're saying and what you're going to run through here now in taking that half an hour to write it down or prepare. And even if you choke at the time of, especially in an emergency situation, you know, you've got the dishwasher here or the plumber or whatever. You've taken that time to either type it into the app or write it down or whatever. Guess what? You can show him. And it's like, it's there. You've made the preparation and you've then now got a conversation going, even if it is with hands, etc. But you've taken the effort to go, I really want to make sure I'm going to get this particular task done here. And therefore I'm going to look it up, learn it, write it down. I'll try and say it as much as I can, but if I can't, I've got to show it as well.
Keep your pronunciation guide clear and you will be able to say it.
Yep.
And your brain is going to kick in. I don't know what scientific studies are out there, and I probably should go and get a PhD in this, but there's a certain, I'm positive about this from experience, the brain kicks in if you use something, it's relevant to you personally, and you see a result. It's almost like sending a signal to the brain, this is an important word.
Yep.
This is an important thing to remember. And it kind of kicks the brain up into a higher gear. When I'm looking at a textbook and memorizing lists of vocabulary for a test, there's some part of my brain that knows that this really isn't that important except for the test. So as soon as the test is over, I forget it.
Yes, yeah.
But if there's some real life stake going on, it's almost like the brain detects like there's something more important about this and it's easier to remember this the next time. I found this to be true.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, let's have dinner.
Let's have dinner. All right, so the main plate, the main dish for dinner is live conversation. That's how you learn.
Yeah.
You can do all the on computer dialogue games, everything. I'm not saying any of that is bad. It's all good. But ultimately, if you want to speak with people, you got to practice speaking with people. Otherwise, it's like saying, I want to learn how to swim, and I'm sitting here in the classroom with these charts that show me how to make the stroke, and there's these diagrams like that, and like this and that, but I don't go in the pool. It's the same idea. Yeah. If you want to talk with people, you got to practice it talking with people.
Yeah.
So here are the tools. On the left, you've got your listening. So you just need to listen a lot and drill. I find that really important. Drill over and over. It's okay to ask your language learning partner, friend, to give you a half an hour to say the same sentence 4 times, to change some of the words. Instead of Mary, say Jenny, then get a little braver. Instead of saying go, say come. Instead of say to the market, say to the movie. And start like that on a real basic level where you're just changing things out and seeing that the sentence is like a rubber band. It's elastic enough to change, to hold its shape even though you're changing different parts out.
Yep.
It's really good. Evaluate. Evaluate just is basically about who are you talking with? What are your needs? Who are you as a communicator? People in long-term relationships like you two can finish each other's sentences. You can practically read each other's thoughts. So at that point, you know kind of what language the other person uses as their habitual form of solving problems, asking for things, convincing somebody of something that they think is important, et cetera, all these functions that we communicate with language, right? We use language for every one of them.
Yep.
And we all have our own personal style. Getting to know enough of our personal style to have even a list of 5 typical phrases that Jody says. Well, when you learn how to say that in Greek, well then that's Jody in Greek. I mean, that's God honest Jody in Greek.
Still involves wine, so either way, vino, wine.
Yeah.
So evaluating means just being observant. And then scripting, we talked about, and role-playing. Role-playing's good. Use theater role-playing stuff.
Yeah.
Pretend you're the waitress. Pretend you're the client. It's a game. Pretend. Use your script. Read it. Try and be a little, like, be obvious if you want, and then try and be a little less obvious on the second round of the role-play until you get to the point where you don't even need it.
We do know that our favourite role-playing is definitely Nat being an Italian. She gets really animated.
I think I got Italian in my family somewhere.
You got the thing going on.
Well, I could really get into that. Yeah, I was actually, my sister's married to an Italian. Maybe I picked it up through all those dealing with him.
Part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's one language that I actually really got into the flow, into the actual role-playing of. It was hilarious.
Fun. It can be fun. This is if it's fun, it's better, isn't it?
It was fun. It was really cool.
That, and mapping really just means like the mind mapping. So knowing what your priorities are. It's sometimes better to visually map things and then go, yeah, this is something I do 3 times a week. I'm going to learn this before I learn the thing that I may only do once. So it's just understanding who we are as a communicator and then adapting how we learn the language to that, which is kind of common sense and at the same time sort of revolutionary, because all the language learning programs out there teach you the language in general terms with actors and dialogues and lists, and none of it trickles. It's like trickle down theory. Somehow you're gonna somehow by osmosis know how to apply that to what you need. This is saying switch it up, know what you need first, and then go for it in the language. The resources are there.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy that aspect of what you've said today, is like have those senses and stuff like that.
Just to recap, I mean, I would say language plus house sitter equals, and I have these 4 points, right? So I think it makes you a more effective house sitter. I definitely think that if you're comfortable learning how to learn languages or being a little more comfortable that way, then you're able to handle more exotic assignments, places that are more remote, places where other house sitters couldn't compete because Joe Blow and his wife Mary couldn't fathom, having to learn Turkish to go hang out in a ranch somewhere in Turkey. But you might have that edge or advantage. And then it helps you once you're there to get a foothold in the place and feel like you're taking ownership of this experience that you're having, and you're not just bumbling around as a tourist and expecting people, even though some of them are happy to do it, but some maybe not. Expecting people to know English all over the world, I think, is still quite unfair.
Well, it's a bit arrogant.
It's very arrogant. Yeah, it is a bit.
I think it's unfair, because if somebody showed up in the United States and they're speaking Russian to me, what would my reaction be if I put the shoe on the other foot? I mean, I might want to help them and think, poor person, they don't know Russian, but that's not the attitude of the English-speaking tourist, usually. It's more like, I expect you to know because I'm paying you.
Yes, yeah.
I'm paying you.
And it's not sort of saying arrogance in a really nasty way. It literally is kind of an innocent arrogance to a degree. I mean, we come from an island at the bottom of the world that has no borders. So there's no real need for us to have another language. I mean, a lot of people in the United States do actually have Spanish if they've grown up in the southern part of the States like you did. You grew up in Arizona and, you did have the Mexican maid that would speak to you in Spanish. We don't have that kind of experience because...
Well, more and more, Australia is so international. Goodness.
It is now, but when we were kids, we learnt German and French, and because we come under the old English system, which makes sense when you're in England, but we're miles away from any of that. Like, it's sort of like, why are we learning German and French?
Greek and Lebanese more than anything if you're in Melbourne.
Well, now they're learning Indonesian because that's on our doorstep.
And Japanese.
And Japanese, because we've got so many tourists coming in, and a lot of our signs are actually in Japanese now and stuff like that. So that makes sense, like to be able to talk to people more and who's there in the population now. But way back when, I think that's why Australians find it particularly difficult, and maybe other countries as well, because it was never instilled in us to learn another language, really, other than 6 months of German, 6 months of French, because you had to do it, basically, and I hated it.
I was in the same system.
Yeah.
And I never learned languages in a classroom. That's why I get kind of like, maybe I remember early childhood trauma or something. But I just feel like they're not speaking to me. They're teaching me a language, but they're not teaching me how to be in the language.
Yes.
As much as I need a higher level of personal relationship.
Well,
Interesting.
your key word is immersion. It's like, you know, it is about being in the language. Therefore, it's immersing yourself in the language. It's immersing yourself into those live conversations, and that childlike aspect to it. You know, it's innocent, and that's when you're the most like a sponge to draw it all in. Because when you've got more of that childlike, rather than the pressure of, you know, grammar and the correct way of saying, you know, constructing a sentence, etc. I mean, this is about conversational language, and it's about immersing yourself into something, you know, because there's a heap of benefits that, like, we want to talk about some of the benefits really of that definitely are written here. But if you are a solo traveler, you know, like, there is, of course, the dating game, and
makes it a lot more interesting if you can chat in the local language. Definitely. Tinder, etc.
You can get a little bit further.
Oh, absolutely. They say the best place to learn a language is horizontally. I'll leave that to your interpretation.
There's
What other activities do I do horizontally with people?
Swimming.
And that's creating adventures that are off the map. That's really taking the ownership of your experience there, and just, learning to laugh, live, love, eat, and everything as it filters through in this language.
It's like immersing in life, really.
Very cool.
It's very, like, you're very inspiring. You're inspiring to watch in action with your language learning. A huge help to everybody as well. Like, we've had the experience both. We didn't do so good in the Greek side of things. You would always give us a hard time about knowing our 5 words of Greek only, not in any sentence construct. But we did do a bit better with the Italian stuff. And now we're heading into Spanish speaking. We're going to do a lot better and use some of these tools that you've got here as well.
Yeah, we will.
So, I mean, at this point in time, you know, we've seen that you definitely need to be getting your methodology out there. You are a polyglot, you know, whether that be by choice or just by evolution, it's happened that way. But what you've got to share with people is huge. So how can we get in contact with you? And as soon as what you're creating in the way of a course for everybody, we can share as well. But right now, you're taking students in for sort of most languages, I believe.
Yeah, so I am an online language coach. I think it's important because there's confusion around what that means. It's kind of a new thing.
Yep.
Your language coach helps you strategize your communication and work through all of that tool so that you take ownership in your life and you basically learn the language from where you need.
Yes.
So it's kind of a communication coach for the language. And then a language teacher teaches the mechanics of the language. Yep. I'm both in 4 languages. So I can do English, Spanish, Italian, and Arabic up to an intermediate level.
Yep.
And then the other ones, you know, I'm not coaching currently yet. So that's fine. But
that's a good distinction, though. Yeah, it's definitely
I think it's an important distinction.
That construct it's definitely a help, and you know, certainly just in the process, it's almost like looking over your shoulder in how you would do it if you were going to be going to Turkey or this or that, and then you're helping in that regard of literally how you are doing it. So it's like that one step ahead of you type of, I guess, more like the buddy aspect, you know, like being able to kind of run it past, like, oh, here's the conversations or scripts I'm thinking of, you know, how would you say it or do it? And almost even just the ideas, because you've got so many ideas on where they can go and find those language buddies or practice it or anything as well. There's
how to connect to the resources. There's also, and we haven't mentioned this because I think it's important to mention, is most of the issue with learning a language is it's not even about the language itself. It's about our fear. We get performance anxiety and fears of looking silly, etc. And a coach can help you to overcome those fears. At the same time, they can help you to be accountable so that you're actually doing those practices. If you know you're meeting with your coach and your assignment is to have gone out and done X number of interactions that you scripted and practiced, That's going to get you to do more of those. With the teacher, you're just learning the language. There's no live stakes there. And I think that piece is really important because we do get scared. It happens to all of us. And this is why classrooms are kind of a perfect solution for the fear, because you never have to speak with native speakers when you're in Spanish 101 or 102. You're speaking with a teacher who may be native, but they're paid to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're out there in the world with people who don't care, they take you at face value. They don't care who you are. You just walk into their bar and they want to know what you want to drink. You know, they don't care about who you are as a language learner. There's a whole other level of learning, but there's also another level of fear. What if I mess up? What if I'm wasting somebody's time? What if they find out I'm a phony? All these fears come up that are part of the performance anxiety, and a coach can definitely help with overcoming them and being accountable so that you're actually doing regular practice. Because unless you're practicing live, you're not going to get that good at speaking.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing, isn't it? Like because we would learn with you on Skype and stuff, and that was fine. We would practice. Then we get our phonetic stuff. We take all the tools that you've given us and stuff, which are awesome. So we'd have some confidence going in. But then, when you're actually going in, it's like, wow, this is like, ooh, this is another level again. So what does it happen? Goes like, okay, it's your turn now. They go into the pharmacy and ask for something. It's like, okay, all right. So you go in and he's like, it's just so much nerves come up.
I know. And it doesn't, the only consolation I can say is it gets easier. Every single time you do a similar interaction, your nerve level goes down because you know what you're saying now. You know, every time you know more and you have more confidence. The sameness starts to support you.
Yeah, and you almost need to have that experience and go, oh, I did okay. Like I came out, nothing happened to me, I survived.
They didn't run me out, they didn't run me out with a rifle.
Yeah, that's right. I'm actually okay. So it's almost building that confidence as well. I was like, oh, okay, I'll have another go because that one was
a huge part of this kind of learning, that it has to be done. And that's why I think of it sometimes, this is the extreme sport version of language learning.
I agree.
But it's awesome as well because, I mean, when you really get to identify that the only blockage, the only enemy in your way, given that you can take all of these tools, you can follow all of these processes, the only thing that is your sabotage is your own ego. So it's kind of like, if I can step back into that childlike stage where ego is so much less, then I can really have a rich experience with this and have fun with it and not be terrorized by it.
Or be humble.
Or have a laugh. Have a laugh that I'm having a panic attack over going to the store and ordering jelly beans.
I know.
Really? Is it really that important?
Will I die?
Let's put it into context here. I just bought 5 bananas.
Exactly. And it felt like the world was coming down on me. And it does. Those are the feelings at first. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest. When I've done these extreme things, like go to a country with no previous background, show up, not use English from week 1, there have been days where I've stayed in the house. I've avoided all contact because I was just too intimidated. There have been times when the phone rings, I won't answer it. The doorbell rings, I'm loath to go get the door and find out, what is it that you want? I'm not prepared. I don't know who it is or what they want. And so, it happens to everyone.
And I think in those situations as well, it's probably a nice reminder now to remember human connection at its greatest form actually does go beyond language. It can be done.
Words.
It can be done with eyes, with body language, etc. But it's almost like that's the first date example of sort of going, right, if I can just trust that this person is just another version of me, it's just another human being in the world of who I can connect with, then the second date will kick in. It's like, now I'm going to try and talk to them, whether I'm not there or not, not in the language or not. But it's sort of, I guess, that whole immersion, courage. And thank you for your vulnerability. Yeah,
it's like even here in Barbados, I really struggle to understand people.
You're dealing with a foreign language.
They speak English, apparently.
Apparently.
But I do. I really hold back. Like, I wait for Jodie to step up. I watch myself do it. I was like to answer the phone or the door or to deal with the tradesperson. We've had a few tradespersons here. And it's like, because they speak to me and I just like look at them going, I have no idea what you just said to me. Like, and there's this blank look on my face.
Could you speak in English? But I am speaking in English.
Really?
Yeah.
So speaking of,
again, once the feeling of, it's like water again. It's like I can stand by the edge of the pool and I can think about how cold that water is going to be. And I can just stand there. And the longer I stand there, the worse.
the colder it gets.
It is, the harder it is to get in. Once I get in, I go through that momentary splash shock, and then I'm in it. And then there's a different mindset, and I'm starting to enjoy it. And this has been very true, this analogy for me with the speaking.
Yeah. It's like anything, isn't it? Going to the gym's the same. Like hold back, go in and go, oh, this is really fun. Like,
So you build it. You build it.
That's a strange human trait that we have, that we all do it.
You build it. And so in increments. For example, one last thing. When I was living in Barcelona, I wanted to learn Catalan because I had already lived there a year. I knew Spanish. And Catalan is really their home language. It's what people talk to their families in.
Right.
And I thought, I had a weird situation where I went to a class, and it was a mountaineering class, and they were all speaking Catalan. And then the moment I introduced myself, the whole class had to switch to Spanish for my benefit.
Right.
And that was the last time I said I wanted that to happen. I don't want to come in. It's like being a light footprint. I don't want to come in and change everything from how it would normally be. I want to integrate as much as I can.
Yep.
So the way to learn a bilingual, what I found, a way to learn with bilinguals, and all Catalans speak perfect Spanish, and they have flash switching. So the moment they know you're not Catalan, they switch into Spanish, right? That's the main language for everybody, where Catalan's just the one for them.
Yep.
I had to go and say to them, okay, on Wednesdays only, I'm going to practice Catalan. So on that day, I will speak to you, shopkeeper, waiter in cafe that I always go to where I'm known in Spanish. I will speak to you in Catalan, and please do your best to speak to me in Catalan. That's the only day. The rest of the week, you can do whatever you want. But that one day is going to be sacred for me.
Yeah.
And the first week, I didn't even go out on the Wednesday. I was just so
every Wednesday.
I didn't even go out. And I'm like, okay, next Wednesday. So that was still, it served me because it built the pressure up that I thought, geez, come on, I skipped a whole Wednesday. Next Wednesday I will. Next Wednesday I will. Next Wednesday came, and it was like noon before I left the house. I was like, no. And I did. And people had all funny reactions. Some didn't answer me in Catalan. They answered me in Spanish because they knew me already in Spanish. And then I reminded them, and I said it in my broken Catalan. And like this, I would do this every week. And there was this one woman, everybody was changing to Catalan with me slowly, and this one woman just wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. It was all Spanish. And one day I go, and it was like everything for €1 kind of store. And I went with a bag of pennies, the equivalent of pennies. And I show up and I make this $35, $40 purchase in pennies. I'm at the register and I'm counting one penny after another. And we were friends. Yeah, we were friends. I'm counting one penny after another, and I tell her, I'm paying you by the penny because that's how cheap you are with your Catalan. You give it to me by the penny, I said. And so I'm paying you by the penny. And she said, oh, please never do this to me again. Okay, next time I'll speak to you in Catalan. I promise. And we switched our relationship. It was really cool.
It's hilarious.
All right. So
ways to do humor,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the key.
Key takeaways for me are fun, laughter, courage. But I think that courage to be vulnerable as well is really important. And, you definitely we've seen the shy side of you, and we've also seen the entertaining storyteller side of you. And unfortunately, the internet didn't want to see you sing before, but right now we're going to say let's sing.
Let's do some German.
In German. How are you learning? What made you choose this particular song? Was it just because you're a musician? You are a piano player. Like, music is obviously important to you.
If I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it. Maybe you can. So this is for pronunciation, yeah, and just getting a flow for the sentences. All right, here we go. Und dass unten los ist egal. Wir finden einen Weg, so wie das Mal. Ich trag dich durch die schweren Seiten, so wie ein Schatten werde ich dich begleiten. Ich werde dich begleiten, denn es ist nie zu spät, um nochmal durchzustarten, wo hinter all den schwarzen Wolken wieder gute Zeiten warten. Okay, done. That's like humiliating.
Well done. But yeah, it's a great way to learn, definitely, because as we said before, you never forget the words to songs, like once you pick them up. Like, it's such
and they're the way people naturally speak to each other.
Very cool.
So anyway, I'm like an omnivore when it comes to language. I'll try just about anything because everything does have, many things have little merit, a bit of merit, and then you just kind of make the puzzle.
Yeah.
So the course will be like what I recommend based on all this stuff.
Definitely. And I think that's the benefit of getting your course, is that you've taken the best of the best. We've watched it over all the years to take all the different ways. You have tried everything, and to actually distill that into one place and go, this is what works.
Actually, something else that you've talked about, and we really look forward to seeing it one day, is actually having a live immersion experience. So coming and meeting up with you somewhere in the world, hanging out for a few days and going and having these things in that kind of safety of numbers, safety of the group thing. So I think that's definitely reaching out on that level too. And it'll be fun to do. I mean, basically, if anyone's got any ideas of that, like mixed with good food, of course. It's the immersion part for you is all about the food and the language, and
I do more eating in languages than probably anything else.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. So much to share, and everyone can get in contact with you. You're in the inner circle, and we'll have the details underneath this video as well. So be sure to reach out to Edward Graham. We know him on Facebook either as 𝗍𝗲 Graham, and you may, if you hear us talking about Eric, because that was his nickname as a kid. So
it's another person.
That's another person.
It's another part of the same person.
It's another role.
Another role.
Every now and again.
Just another role. You can hear me when I'm speaking like Eric.
And just to finish off with the languages that you do speak, and not just all sort of the European Middle East, you actually do Japanese as well.
So I could just say, so why don't you name a language and I'll say something in it.
In Japanese.
何を言いましょうか、日本語で。
Thanks. All I know is konnichiwa. So
なんだよや。Like one of those samurai caricatures.
ありがとう。
どういたしまして。
Sounds like we're going to turn into anime characters. Yeah, exactly. Coolio. All right. Well, I'm not even going to ask what's your favorite, because I think there's so many of them for you. But
yeah, it's hard to know. Right now, German.
Yeah, it's wherever you are right now.
Yeah, and English, because I get to talk with cool people like you. Yeah. Yeah. So reach out to me, people. House sitters out there in the world.
Yeah. Reach out.
Languages are waiting for you. Doors of opportunity are waiting to open for you.
It's true.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yalla sharifna bil-Arabiyya.
Shukran.
That's more like a ganja, like a Rastafarian Arabic, yeah.
Rastafarian Arabic.
No, now I'm mixing it with. This is another thing. When you speak languages, they all start coming into one sentence sometimes.
All right.
يلا السلام عليكم.
Get him off.
يلا من فضلك.
He'll
يلا.
go forever.
Ciao.
Ciao.